Long before explorers crossed oceans and long before maps claimed to reveal every corner of the earth, an extraordinary story began along the eastern coast of China. Fishermen spoke of an island unlike any other, a place that appeared only when the sea and sky became one. They described towering mountains wrapped in brilliant white clouds, forests that never withered, crystal streams that shimmered like liquid jade, and magnificent palaces where the immortals were said to live forever. They called it Penglai. It was not merely a paradise beyond the horizon. It was believed to hold the greatest treasure imaginable, the secret of eternal life. The legend became so powerful that emperors devoted fortunes to finding it. Scholars filled books trying to explain it. Sailors risked disappearing beyond the edge of the known world, and generations of ordinary people continued looking toward the sea, wondering if one day the mysterious island would appear before their eyes. More than 2,000 years later, the question still remains. Was Penglai only a beautiful legend born from hope, or did countless people throughout history witness something so extraordinary that they could never forget it? Tonight, we travel to one of China's most enduring legends, where history and imagination have sailed side by side for centuries, and where one mysterious island has inspired explorers, emperors, pilgrims, and dreamers to believe that perhaps the impossible was never quite as impossible as it seemed. Just before sunrise, when the Bohai Sea is wrapped in a blanket of pale silver mist, there are mornings when the horizon seems to play tricks on the eyes. The water disappears into the sky melts into the sea, and distant shapes slowly begin rising where only moments before there had been nothing at all. Sailors have watched mountain peaks appear to float above the ocean. Fishermen have pointed toward shimmering palaces suspended in the clouds. Entire coastlines have seemed to materialize out of empty water before quietly fading back into the mist. Today we understand that unusual atmospheric conditions can create extraordinary optical mirages known as fata morgana. But for the people who witnessed these breathtaking visions thousands of years ago, there was only one explanation. They believed they were looking at Penglai. Along China's eastern coast, stories spread from one fishing village to another about an island that revealed itself only to the fortunate, the patient, or perhaps those whose hearts were worthy of seeing it. Elders described a land where winter never arrived, where magnificent gardens bloomed throughout the year, where rare animals wandered without fear, and where streams carried waters believed to grant perfect health and endless life. Unlike many legends that belonged to a single village or region, Penglai grew into something much greater. It became part of the hopes of an entire civilization. Grandparents told the story to children, who would one day become fishermen themselves. Sailors heading into uncertain seas whispered quiet prayers that perhaps this voyage would be different. Some believed that seeing Penglai meant great blessings were about to enter their lives. Others believed the island deliberately hid itself from those driven by greed, revealing its shores only to those seeking wisdom rather than wealth. This belief gave the legend a remarkable quality. Penglai was never described as a place someone could conquer. It was a place that chose whether to reveal itself. Ancient Chinese writings began mentioning not one, but several sacred islands far beyond the Eastern Sea, each inhabited by beings who had escaped sickness, suffering, and death itself. Among them, Penglai became the most celebrated. The immortals who lived there were said to possess profound wisdom gathered over countless lifetimes. They were not warriors ruling an empire or kings sitting upon golden thrones. Instead, they represented harmony between humanity and nature, reminding those who heard their stories that true greatness came not from power but from inner peace. That message helped the legend survive through changing dynasties, changing beliefs, and changing generations. Yet legends rarely grow this large without something inspiring them. Along the Shandong coastline, unusual sea mirages continued appearing through the centuries. Travelers recorded seeing distant mountains hanging in the air, entire cities floating above the horizon, and islands that vanished before anyone could approach them. Even today, photographers gather along the coast hoping to capture these extraordinary atmospheric displays. Modern science explains the phenomenon, but knowing the explanation does not lessen the experience. Imagine standing on a quiet shoreline before dawn, watching the first light spread across the sea, when suddenly an island seems to rise from the mist, suspended between heaven and earth. For just a few breathtaking moments, reality itself appears uncertain. It becomes easy to understand why generations before us believed they had glimpsed another world. Those fleeting visions became the heartbeat of the Penglai legend. They transformed ordinary fishermen into storytellers, inspired poets to write verses that survived for centuries, and planted a question in the minds of rulers who possessed everything except the one thing no emperor could command: eternal life. Among those rulers was one man whose obsession with Penglai will become one of the greatest quests in Chinese history. He did not simply dream about the island. He intended to find it, no matter what the cost. By the 3rd century before Christ, the legend of Penglai had reached the ears of the most powerful man in China, a ruler whose ambition knew no equal. Qin Shi Huang had conquered rival kingdoms, united a fractured nation, standardized its writing, currency, and measurements, and begun building projects so immense they would astonish the world for centuries. Yet despite commanding millions of subjects and believing that nothing lay beyond his reach, he faced an enemy every emperor eventually confronts: time. No army could defeat it. No fortress could keep it out. No law could command it to stop. The first emperor became consumed by a single desire: to escape death itself. While ordinary people accepted that life followed the rhythm of birth and passing, Qin Shi Huang refused to believe that the greatest ruler in history should share the same fate as everyone else. Court scholars, physicians, astrologers, and Taoist practitioners searched for answers. Again and again, one name appeared in their discussions: Penglai. Ancient traditions spoke of immortals living upon islands beyond the Eastern Sea, possessing herbs, fruits, and elixirs capable of granting endless life. To many rulers, such stories would have remained fascinating legends. To Qin Shi Huang, they became a mission worthy of an empire. He ordered expeditions to the coast. Messengers questioned fishermen who had spent their lives upon the Bohai Sea. Sailors described strange islands emerging through morning mist only to disappear before anyone could approach them. Others insisted they had seen distant mountains suspended above the horizon, glowing in the first light of dawn. Whether these reports were sincere observations, hopeful exaggerations, or the extraordinary sea mirages now understood by science, they only strengthened the emperor's determination. If ordinary fishermen believed they had glimpsed Penglai, surely the Son of Heaven could reach it. His court became filled with conversations about immortality. Ancient texts were collected. Wise men were summoned from distant provinces. Every rumor was investigated. Every possibility considered. Then one man stepped forward with remarkable confidence. His name was Su Fu, a court scholar who claimed he knew how the island might finally be reached. Su Fu told the emperor that Penglai was real, but that the immortals would not simply welcome strangers seeking eternal life. The journey required patience, preparation, and a grand expedition unlike anything China had attempted before. According to later historical accounts and enduring tradition, Su Fu requested ships, skilled sailors, craftsmen, supplies, and hundreds of young men and women to accompany him across the sea. The emperor agreed. Imagine the scene along China's eastern coast. Massive wooden ships prepared for a voyage into waters few dared to cross. Families watched sons and daughters board vessels bound for a destination no one could guarantee existed. Sailors loaded food, tools, seeds, and gifts intended for beings no ordinary person had ever met. It was more than an expedition. It was an act of extraordinary hope. If Penglai existed, China would gain the greatest treasure ever imagined. If it did not, the fleet would vanish into uncertainty. As the sails caught the wind and the shoreline slowly disappeared behind them, those left standing on the beach could only watch until the ships became tiny shadows against the horizon. Somewhere beyond that endless sea, people believed, lay an island untouched by sickness, untouched by war, untouched even by time itself. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Then years. But the ships did not return with the miraculous elixir the emperor desired. Instead, Su Fu himself became one of history's greatest mysteries. Ancient Chinese chronicles record the expedition, yet what happened after the fleet disappeared has been debated for more than 2,000 years. Some traditions claim violent storms prevented the return. Others say Su Fu reached a fertile land, established a peaceful settlement, and chose never to go back. Later legends in both China and Japan even suggested that he may have arrived in the Japanese archipelago, bringing knowledge, agriculture, and culture to new shores. Whether history, folklore, or a blend of both, the disappearance of Su Fu transformed the search for Penglai forever. The quest was no longer only about finding an immortal island. It had become one of the world's oldest unsolved voyages, leaving generations to wonder whether the greatest discovery had been made, or whether the island had once again chosen to remain hidden. Believed to grant perfect health and endless life. Unlike many legends that belonged to a single village or region, Penglai grew into something much greater. It became part of the hopes of an entire civilization. Grandparents told the story to children who would one day become fishermen themselves. Sailors heading into uncertain seas whispered quiet prayers that perhaps this voyage would be different. Some believed that seeing Penglai meant great blessings were about to enter their lives. Others believed the island deliberately hid itself from those driven by greed, revealing its shores only to those seeking wisdom rather than wealth. This belief gave the legend a remarkable quality. Penglai was never described as a place someone could conquer. It was a place that chose whether to reveal itself. Ancient Chinese writings began mentioning not one, but several sacred islands far beyond the Eastern Sea, each inhabited by beings who had escaped sickness, suffering, and death itself. Among them, Penglai became the most celebrated. The immortals who lived there were said to possess profound wisdom gathered over countless lifetimes. They were not warriors ruling an empire or kings sitting upon golden thrones. Instead, they represented harmony between humanity and nature, reminding those who heard their stories that true greatness came not from power but from inner peace. That message helped the legend survive through changing dynasties, changing beliefs, and changing generations. Yet legends rarely grow this large without something inspiring them. Along the Shandong coastline, unusual sea mirages continued appearing through the centuries. Travelers recorded seeing distant mountains hanging in the air, entire cities floating above the horizon, and islands that vanished before anyone could approach them. Even today, photographers gather along the coast hoping to capture these extraordinary atmospheric displays. Modern science explains the phenomenon, but knowing the explanation does not lessen the experience. Imagine standing on a quiet shoreline before dawn, watching the first light spread across the sea, when suddenly an island seems to rise from the mist, suspended between heaven and earth. For just a few breathtaking moments, reality itself appears uncertain. It becomes easy to understand why generations before us believed they had glimpsed another world. Those fleeting visions became the heartbeat of the Penglai legend. They transformed ordinary fishermen into storytellers, inspired poets to write verses that survived for centuries, and planted a question in the minds of rulers who possessed everything except the one thing no emperor could command: eternal life. Among those rulers was one man whose obsession with Penglai would become one of the greatest quests in Chinese history. He did not simply dream about the island. He intended to find it, no matter what the cost. The disappearance of Su Fu should have ended the legend. Most failed expeditions are eventually forgotten. Maps are redrawn, dreams abandoned, and history quietly moves on. But Penglai refused to disappear. Instead, the mystery became even stronger. Every generation inherited not only the story of the island, but also the unanswered question left behind by the fleet that never truly came home. Along the eastern coast of China, fishermen continued launching their boats before sunrise, just as their fathers and grandfathers had done. Many understood the sea better than anyone else. They knew where the currents changed, where fog gathered, and where distant mountains normally appeared. Yet among these experienced sailors were those who insisted that, on rare mornings, the horizon behaved in ways they could not explain. Some described seeing towering cliffs suspended above the sea where open water should have been. Others spoke of brilliant white structures that shimmered in the distance before dissolving into mist as the sun climbed higher. These accounts were never presented as dramatic miracles. They were shared quietly, often between families or fellow fishermen who had spent decades reading the moods of the ocean. To them, the sea was alive, capable of revealing extraordinary sights, only for a few fleeting moments. Modern meteorologists explain that unusual atmospheric conditions above the Bohai Sea can produce remarkable superior mirages, causing distant coastlines and islands to appear elevated, distorted, or impossibly close. Yet understanding the science has never erased the emotion. Even today, visitors who witness these rare displays often pause in complete silence. For just a few minutes, reality appears to bend. Land seems to float. The horizon disappears. Mountains rise where there should be only open water. Suddenly, the ancient stories no longer feel naive. They feel understandable. It becomes easy to imagine why generations believed they had glimpsed another world. That is one reason the legend endured for more than 2,000 years. But Penglai survived because of something even deeper. It became woven into Taoist philosophy, where the island represented far more than a physical destination. It symbolized humanity's search for harmony, wisdom, and a life lived in balance with nature. The immortals were never admired simply because they could not die. They were respected because they had transcended greed, anger, pride, and fear. In many ancient paintings, they are shown laughing together, crossing the sea, carrying simple objects, a fan, a flute, a basket of flowers, a sword, not symbols of conquest, but reminders that fulfillment comes through character rather than power. Among them, the legendary eight immortals became some of the most beloved figures in Chinese culture. Their adventures, miracles, humor, and compassion-filled stories told during festivals, family gatherings, and temple celebrations. One of the most famous tales describes them crossing the sea using their own unique gifts rather than relying on a single boat. The lesson was simple but profound. Every person possesses different strengths, and together those strengths overcome obstacles that none could conquer alone. In that way, Penglai stopped being only an island somewhere beyond the horizon. It became a destination of the heart, reminding people that the greatest journey was not always across an ocean but within oneself. Yet history and legend continued walking together. During later dynasties, poets traveled to the Shandong coast searching not necessarily for immortality, but for inspiration. Standing on the cliffs overlooking the Bohai Sea, they watched waves disappear into endless fog and imagined Sufu sailing beyond the visible world. They wrote poems comparing Penglai to humanity's eternal pursuit of hope itself. Artists painted luminous islands floating above the clouds. Scholars debated whether the stories contained hidden truths. Pilgrims visited temples dedicated to the immortals, leaving offerings not because they expected to live forever, but because the legend reminded them to seek wisdom over wealth and purpose over power. What began as the dream of fishermen had become one of the great cultural treasures of China. Every generation added another layer. Every generation found new meaning. Few legends in human history have evolved so naturally, carrying with them history, philosophy, faith, exploration, and imagination without losing their original sense of wonder. And perhaps the most remarkable chapter of the story was still waiting, because unlike many ancient legends that slowly faded into forgotten books, Penglai never truly vanished. Even today, people continue making the journey to the very coast where the legend was born, standing above the sea at dawn, quietly waiting to see whether the horizon might reveal something extraordinary once again. Today, the search for Penglai no longer begins with an emperor's command or an explorer's fleet. It begins quietly, just as it did thousands of years ago, with people standing beside the sea before sunrise. Along the coast of Shandong province, overlooking the Bohai Sea, sits the real Penglai Pavilion, one of China's oldest and most celebrated coastal landmarks. For centuries, scholars, emperors, monks, artists, merchants, fishermen, and ordinary families have climbed its terraces to look toward the eastern horizon. They all arrived for different reasons, yet many found themselves asking the very same question. What if the stories began because someone really saw something extraordinary? The pavilion itself has witnessed dynasties rise and fall. It has survived wars, storms, and centuries of change while continuing to overlook the same stretch of sea that inspired one of humanity's most enduring legends. During certain weather conditions, visitors still gather with cameras in hand, hoping to witness the remarkable optical phenomenon known locally as the mirage of Penglai. Entire coastlines appear suspended above the water. Buildings seem to float in the air. Mountains stretch across the horizon where moments earlier there had been only empty sea. Scientists understand the atmospheric conditions that create these superior mirages, yet when they finally appear, even those who know the science often stop speaking. For a few unforgettable moments, the sea seems capable of revealing another world. It is one thing to read about Penglai in an ancient book. It is something entirely different to stand on those cliffs, watch the horizon transform before your own eyes, and realize that people standing in exactly the same place 2,000 years ago may have experienced something remarkably similar. Suddenly, history becomes deeply personal. The legend no longer belongs only to emperors and immortals. It belongs to every traveler willing to pause long enough to watch the sea. Throughout the centuries, poets returned here searching for inspiration rather than answers. Painters tried to capture the moment when sky, cloud, and ocean blended into a single, dreamlike landscape. Pilgrims came not to escape death, but to reflect upon life. Fishermen still respected the moods of the water, understanding that the sea can reveal beauty beyond expectation. Families passed the story of Penglai to their children, not as a promise that immortality could be found beyond the horizon, but as a reminder that hope itself is worth preserving. Perhaps that is why the legend has survived while countless others faded away. Penglai was never truly about living forever. It was about humanity refusing to stop searching for something greater than itself. Qin Shi Huang's search for eternal life. Sufu's search for an impossible island. Taoist sages search for harmony. Poets search for inspiration. Travelers search for beauty. Every generation pursued something different, yet all found themselves drawn toward the same horizon. In that sense, Penglai became a mirror reflecting humanity's deepest aspirations. We all search for something just beyond our reach. Sometimes it is wisdom, sometimes purpose, sometimes peace, sometimes simply the reassurance that there are still wonders left to discover. Standing on the cliffs today, with the salty breeze moving across the Bohai Sea and the first light of morning painting the water in shades of gold, it becomes easy to understand why this story continues to inspire millions. The greatest legends are not those that answer every question. They are the ones that invite each generation to ask new ones. Whether Penglai was ever a physical island hidden beyond the mist may never be known with certainty. But perhaps that is exactly why it remains so powerful. The mystery was never meant to be conquered. It was meant to keep people looking toward the horizon with curiosity rather than certainty. In a world where satellites have mapped nearly every mountain, every coastline, and every island, Penglai reminds us that the greatest discoveries are not always places we can point to on a map. Sometimes they are ideas that change the way we see the world. Sometimes they are stories that survive because they awaken something timeless inside us. And perhaps on a quiet morning when the sea is perfectly still and the mist begins rising from the Bohai waters, someone standing at Penglai Pavilion will once again see distant mountains floating above the horizon. They may smile, knowing exactly how the mirage works. Or perhaps, just for a single heartbeat, they will wonder if the ancient fishermen were trying to tell us something that no map could ever capture. That possibility, however small, is what has kept the legend of Penglai alive for more than 2,000 years, and it is why people continue making the journey to this remarkable corner of China, hoping not merely to find an island, but to rediscover the sense of wonder that first gave the story life. There are places in the world that impress us because of their size, others because of their beauty, but only a rare few continue inspiring people long after empires have disappeared, languages have changed, and centuries have quietly passed into history. Penglai is one of those extraordinary places. Whether you believe it was a real island hidden beyond the sea, a magnificent mirage born from nature, or a timeless symbol created to remind humanity that there is always something greater waiting beyond the horizon, its greatest gift has never been immortality. Its greatest gift has been hope. For more than 2,000 years, fishermen have looked toward the morning mist. Poets have transformed its beauty into verses. Emperors devoted fortunes trying to reach it. Philosophers found wisdom within its meaning, and ordinary travelers have stood along the cliffs simply wondering if, for a brief moment, they too might witness something extraordinary. Few legends have united so many different people across so many generations with the same feeling of quiet curiosity. That is why Penglai still matters today. It reminds us that the greatest adventures often begin with a question rather than an answer. It reminds us that some journeys are measured not by the places we reach, but by how they change the way we see the world. And perhaps most importantly, it reminds us that wonder is one of humanity's greatest treasures. In an age when almost every destination has been photographed, mapped, and shared across the internet, stories like Penglai encourage us to keep exploring, not because we expect to find immortality, but because every journey offers the possibility of discovering something even more valuable: perspective, inspiration, and a deeper appreciation for the remarkable world we all share. So if one day your own travels bring you to the coast of eastern China, arrive before sunrise. Stand quietly beside Penglai Pavilion as generations have done before you. Watch the mist drift across the Bohai Sea. Listen to the waves. And allow yourself, if only for a single moment, to imagine what an ancient fisherman might have felt when an island seemed to rise from clouds. Whether it was a miracle, a mirage, or simply the power of hope, that feeling has endured for over 2,000 years. And perhaps that is the greatest mystery of all. If you enjoyed this journey into one of China's most enduring legends, subscribe to Tilt and Chill, where every episode takes you beyond ordinary destinations and into the extraordinary stories that have shaped our world. Together, we'll continue exploring remarkable places where history, legend, and wonder meet, one unforgettable journey at a time. Until our next adventure, keep wondering, keep exploring, and never stop believing that this world still holds incredible stories waiting to be discovered.